Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my first video in this new series I'm going to be doing on the channel, and that is my chapter analysis of the Rise of Kyoshi. So I'll be going through every chapter of this book in depth, explaining everything that happens, both the plot, details, references, as in depth as possible. And yes, there'll be one video for every chapter, so I think we're going to be doing over 30 videos. But, obviously some of the chapters are going to be shorter than others and stuff like that. We've got a pretty thick book to deal with here, but I like doing it one at a time. It's probably the best way to do it rather than trying to force, every detail from like 8 chapters or something like that and get it done in a handful of videos. I think this is the best way to do it. So, we are starting off with chapter 1 of the Rise of Kyoshi. And it's called The Test. It's the only chapter in the book that is sort of set completely in the past. It is set when Kyoshi is 7, which means that the year we're talking about here is 305 years before the Air Nomad genocide. So basically, like what, 405 years before the start of the series. So it's a long time ago, but that's the era we're talking about. So it's an era we don't know a ton about. A lot of the stuff we do know from Kyoshi's time is more of like her when she's like about 40 or something like that. So this is even then like a little bit before that. So it is very interesting. Most of the book is actually set 9 years after this. That's what we see most of the book. So 16-year-old Kyoshi. But in this first chapter we have a 9-year-old Kyoshi. And she's only introduced right at the end because our main characters in this book have some notes here. In this first chapter are Jianzhu and Kelsang. Now, what's interesting about these two characters is that they were both close friends of Avatar Kuruk, who is obviously the water avatar before Kyoshi. And if you know your history already prior to this book, you'll already know that there is that weird thing of the way the ages work out is that Kuruk had to have died when he was 33 years old. That's the way the numbers work out. And that is completely true. It's directly confirmed here in the book in the first chapter. For sure, Kuruk died at age 33, very young, and there's a few comments in the chapter because it's from the sort of perspective of Jianzhu, who is an Earth sage at this point in time. But in general, the idea is that he's a fairly high-ranking Earth Kingdom character here. And he and Kelsang are leading the search for the new Earth Avatar. And the idea is that it's been 7 years since Kuruk has died, and they still haven't found the new Avatar. And that is crazy. In the entire recorded history of searching for the Avatar, it has never taken 7 years to find the next Avatar. So this is the longest wait, and it's all compounding together with the fact that Kuruk was known as an avatar that didn't particularly involve himself in a lot of the affairs of the world. So a lot of stuff sort of built up during his reign as the avatar. Then he died early, and now they're in 7 years of searching. So they said the idea that in the last 40 years, to a degree, there hasn't been a lot of an avatar watching over the world, and so stuff has just been allowed to happen and build up. And the main thing in the Earth Kingdom, which is already sort of unstable because of how big it is and how the leadership from Ba Sing Se doesn't have much of a effect on the entire continent, is that bandits basically have become a huge problem throughout the Earth Kingdom, and the term that they use for them throughout this book is the Dao Fei. Now it's sort of a big term referring to just general, bandits, sort of thugs, but it also refers to just groups that don't really agree with the law abiders, effectively, of the Earth Kingdom. They disagree so heavily with the way things are run that they choose to go about things in their own way. Now, the book gets into that in a lot more detail as you go on. The idea of the Dao Fei and it being more than just, hooligans, basically, is dealt into with, some of the interesting ideas they go down of, like, the nobles in a way seem like some of the good characters, but they do things in their own way, whereas there's almost a certain honor in the simplicity of certain groups of Dao Fei. But that's effectively the idea. And so we have at this point in time, as I said, Jianzhu and Kelsang, who were both effectively members of Kuruk's team Avatar. The idea is that they are like effectively the same close-ish to the age of Kuruk if he was still alive. They were, similarly aged. They were his team Avatar. And at some point in the book, I can't remember what chapter exactly, they specifically mentioned that it's usually a thing that they do with the Avatar, the Guardians of the Avatar, is that they let the Avatar build up their team of people in or around their own age and sort of at a certain point figure things out themselves. But this didn't work out so well for Kuruk in that his approach was very much just kind of gallivanting around the world, just experiencing the good things about the different places he was, and he never really fulfilled his role as much as you would expect. And that's kind of just what they get across here, of just you had a lax Avatar in the last time, stuff is built up, there is a need to find the Avatar as soon as possible. And what's happened here as well is that the usual methods on the Earth cycle, when there's a new Earth Avatar, the methods for finding the Earth Avatar have not worked. So they've had to resort to some kind of harsh, tactics that they wouldn't usually do. And in that case, it's shifting from doing things the Earth way to actually using a different nation's method for finding the Avatar. And so they switched to using the Airbenders' way to find the Avatar, the Air Nomad method, which is the Avatar Relics. Now, we've seen these before in the show, in the episode The Storm, which is obviously Aang's flashback, where he explains his experience being found as the Avatar. We see the monks at the temple show Aang 4 specific toys. And he's never seen them before, but he notes that, oh, I remember these are mine, even though he'd never played with them before, with the idea being that these toys are toys that the Avatar remembers regardless of which part of the reincarnation that they're on. So we get the full explanation on what the Air Nomad Avatar test is, and it's basically, it's the choice of these 4 toys among thousands. And, obviously Aang passed it, and they're trying to do that now to find the Earth Avatar. The idea is that Kelsang, who's an airbender, actually stole them from the airbenders. They're kind of doing this behind everyone's back. They are so desperate. This was their task. One of the only things Kuruk ever really asked and stood up for as the Avatar was that when his time was up, that his friends, so Jianzhu and Kelsang, were the ones to go after and find the next Earth Avatar. And he told them to do it. So they are fulfilling Kuruk's wishes here by going ahead with this. So Kelsang has actually stolen the Avatar Relics from the Airbenders, and they set up the idea that he doesn't have the best relationship with them. He is sort of a little bit of an outcast among the Airbenders, but he's taken them anyway. He hasn't told the character Abbot Dorje that he's taken them. And he's just performing this test in this place, Yokoya Port. This is the location where a good amount of the book takes place, and effectively the way to look at this is that Yokoya Port is the place that will become Kyoshi Island eventually. They note it being a peninsula, they note it being very close to both the Southern Water Tribe and the Southern Air Temple, so it's effectively the closest place on the Earth Kingdom to other nations, and that exactly makes sense because in ATLA the first Earth Kingdom stop on the journey was of course Kyoshi Island, but here it is still attached. It is a peninsula. They note that about it. They note it's a fishing village, and they note that fishing is one of the main things there, and they seeing people like knee deep inside an elephant koi. So it all comes together to make sense that it's Yokoya Port. So they're doing this in this sort of out of the way town here. They describe Yokoya Port as sort of being actually a really good place. It's positioned very nice in terms of merchants and sailing. It's just unfortunate that the place also has really good winds, so any ship tends to just kind of blow straight by it instead of stopping. So it's just circumstances mean that Yokoya Port isn't as well off as perhaps it could be, so it's doing quite poorly, and that it's only known for fishing. So they're doing it sort of here out of the way, hoping to maybe get some success before going bigger with the Air Nomad test. So let's take a break here to go back and look at what they describe what the Earthbender test is, what the test is on the Earth side of things for how they typically find their Earth Avatar. So I'll just read this part from the book because there's no incredible way to sum it up. So, Earth avatars were traditionally identified by directional geomancy, a series of rituals designed to winnow through the largest and most populous of the four nations as efficiently as possible. Each time, a special set of bone trigrams was cast and interpreted by the earth-bending masters. Half the Earth Kingdom was ruled out as a location of the newborn avatar, then from the remaining territory another half, and then another half again. The possible locations kept shrinking until the searchers were brought to the doorstep of the Earth Avatar child. It was a quick way to cover ground and entirely fitting to the earth-bending state of mind. A question of logistics, simple to the point of being brutal, and it normally worked on the first try. Jianzhu had been part of expeditions sent by the Bones to barren fields, empty gem caverns below Ba Sing Se, a patch of the Siwang Desert so dry that not even the sandbenders bothered with it. Liu Beifong had read the trigrams. King Burrow of Omashu gave it a shot. Neliao the gardener took her turn. The masters worked their way down through the earthbending hierarchy until Jianzhu racked up his fair share of misses as well. His friendship with Kuruk brought him no special privileges when it came to the next avatar. After the last attempt had placed him on an iceberg in the North Pole with only turtle seals as potential candidates, Jianzhu became open to radical suggestions, and this is where they come up with the idea of using a different nation's method. So, directional geomancy, bone trigrams. It's kind of hard to picture exactly what's going on there, but trigram is obviously like a specific kind of pattern. So, some sort of a trigram made using bones, and then directional geomancy is like the interpretation of like earth or dust patterns or something like that. So I assume it's something like they set up a pattern of bones, they just sprinkle earth somewhere in the middle of it, and then an earth-bending master interprets, I suppose, the way the earth is laid out within the trigram pattern, and from there they interpret a direction or something like that. It's hard to fully picture, but it's just this simple thing of just the earthbender state of mind being connected to the earth and just using like the way earth falls, with I suppose the idea kind of being that like the earth will always fall sort of pointing in some way towards an earth avatar, and that's a good way to do it. It's definitely an interesting idea, and I like that they went into the explanation on it to explain that each nation has their own method. Because I think prior to it, we obviously saw Aang at the Air Temple with the Avatar Relics, but it was never made inherently clear if it was a purely airbender thing that they did it that way, or the toys just happened to be passed from like nation to nation depending on which part of the cycle we were in. Now it's confirmed that the toys are the airbender way of doing things. Earthbenders use directional geomancy, and at one point in the book they explain what kind of potentially is one way to locate a fire avatar. But I don't think it's the full story. It's definitely the way to locate a fire avatar in like a different nation. I'm not sure how much it would work in regards to, if they had to find the fire avatar in the Fire Nation. But still, it's an interesting idea for sure. So the plot, how it happens is that obviously they come in, they set up this massive stall with thousands of toys, including the 4 Avatar Relics just kind of packed in there randomly. And then they get the people of Yokoya Port to bring them their children, specifically asking for kids who are 7 years old, because they know that the child always has to be born the exact amount of time. The cycle is pretty much done in such a way where Kuruk dies, immediately the next avatar is born. So they know Kuruk's been dead 7 years, they know it has to be a 7-year-old child. So the villagers bring their 7-year-olds and the test begins. Initially they get a lot of failures of just the different people, the chief guard of the village brings his daughter, she's unsuccessful. This farmer guy brings his daughter over, and she actually picks out 3 of the Avatar Relics. Which is quite interesting. She picks up 2 straight away, and then with the third one, which is the hog monkey kind of plush, she actually like attacks it. So the idea is that like she didn't like she chose it in sense that like she disliked it. So it's kind of like she accidentally chose a third one. So they realize, okay, it's not her. And then when she's been taken out, like lots of failure basically over the course of the day, this is when Kyoshi's introduced. She is just there kind of on her own. Of course, she's an orphan, her parents aren't around. And they just kind of ask her, like, okay, you come in too, you pick a toy. She picks out the fourth relic, which no one over the course of the day had chosen, the clay turtle. And they're like, okay, that's interesting. Continue, you can choose more toys. And what happens is that Kyoshi begins to get a bit suspicious of this. You know, they're asking her to choose more. She's very cautious in all of this. She actually just runs off with the clay turtle. And eventually, like, she gets away because she knows the streets better than they do. And the idea is that, you know, they're discussing, like, oh, wait, should we go after her or not? What do we do in this situation? And Kelsang basically decides, actually, you know, it's fine. I'll take the heat for this. We'll just say, you know, it got lost. It's fine. And it's an interesting one because, like, Jianzhu is kind of like, really? You know, you're willing to, like, let an Avatar relic be lost just to make this kid happy because she chose this one toy? Like, you're okay with that? And he's just like, yeah, that's fine. And it's obviously set up for what's to come in the sense that, without spoiling too much, getting into the stuff that happens later on, the idea is that Kelsang actually begins to look out for and eventually come to, like, raise Kyoshi. He sees something in her and begins to actually, you know, effectively become her guardian and spend a lot of time in Yokoya Port. So, you know, this is obviously before they realize she's the Avatar and that they don't perform the test on her because obviously someone else gets discovered as the Avatar. But that's the idea, and they kind of talk about, like, how, you know, Kelsang says, I'm sure, you know, the relic will find its way back to where it belongs, you know, eventually, maybe. But we obviously already know it's exactly where it needs to be, in the hands of, you know, Kyoshi, who is the Avatar. Anything else? It's just pretty much just references here and some interesting stuff here. There's a brief moment where basically, as Kyoshi runs off with the relic, Jianzhu, in I suppose his frustration, just kind of gets lost in thought and has a bit of a kind of flashback to obviously an incident from his past. And this is where you have to bring up the idea that they've set up the what's going on in the Earth Kingdom at this point in time. I talked about the bandits, the Dao Fei, and how they've kind of risen up in the last 40 years with Kuruk as being a lax avatar and 7 years without having an avatar. And the main thing they talk about is that, especially in the interior of the Earth Kingdom, is this thing called the Yellow Neck Uprising, this big group of bandits who've been causing a lot of trouble. And then Jianzhu has a flashback to basically, you know, this pretty brutal scene of, you know, he talks about how, you know, village deep in the interior of the Earth Kingdom, a place newly liberated by Zhu Ping An and the Yellownecks. Zhu Ping An is the leader of the Yellownecks and is a character whose name you should remember because it will come back later on in the book. Same with the Yellownecks. They talk about, you know, in this walking dream, the stench of rotting flesh soaked through his clothes, and the cries of survivors haunted the wind. And, you know, he gets a message from the Earth King, and then, you know, he remembers this incident where he's at a table negotiating with Tulok, Lord of the Fifth Nation Pirates, and his daughter, who's a character who will be introduced later on as well. We'll see her a bit as well. And the idea that they're getting across here is that with Kuruk gone, Jianzhu has had to take up a lot of the roles of effectively being that sort of mediator character. He has to go in a lot of these things that are dealing with any sort of issue that happens in the Earth Kingdom. He's often right there in the thick of it, dealing with these bandit insurrections and the negotiations that, like, it really in a way should have... He should be there with Kuruk at his side. But Kuruk is gone, and he had to do it on his own. And it sets up the idea of, like, they go some places with Jianzhu as a character, and just what this sort of pressure, this kind of heightened position he ends up being put in that because he was so close to Kuruk, and because of, I suppose, in a way, the mission Kuruk gave to him, he ends up becoming this super, super important person in the Earth Kingdom in terms of keeping it together. And in a way, like, the power kind of is going to his head a little bit. And we see, you know, he had to deal with, you know, the the dealing with of the Yellownecks and negotiating with pirates and all this sort of stuff. But here he is, trying to find the next Avatar, because that's an important thing. And they set up the idea of, like, obviously the sage who finds the Avatar is in an amazing position, because they get to be right there as the sort of leader of the trading of the Avatar, like one of the most biggest things in the world, and their position just skyrockets. And there's a part of that in there as well with his character. And so it's an interesting one, in that Kelsang is really this kind of fun-loving character, airbender, of course, who just likes fun, your typical airbender. But then Jianzhu is this kind of earthbender character who's a little bit more harsh, but like has this history that he's friends with Kelsang, friends with Kuruk, and it's very, very interesting where they go with him. He's definitely one of the best characters in this book, is Jianzhu. But anything else I have to say is basically just some references. It's like place names. Lots of place names mentioned, even in just the first chapter. Of course, Yokoya Port, which will become Kyoshi Island. They mention it being very close to the Whaletail Strait, and thus Whaletail Island, which we've had referenced before. They mention also that the Kyoshi Island, or Yokoya Port, ends up getting skipped over because a lot of places actually go to kind of restock at Shimsong Big Island, which is actually an island nearby. They mention Omashu here, Makapu Valley. We of course know Makapu Village and the volcano. They mention it being like volcanic terrain and stuff like that. Ba Sing Se of course gets mentioned. Like I said earlier on, Liu Beifong is mentioned as being a noted like earthbending master, along with the section I read out there on the different masters that tried it out. It is interesting to see them mention like masters of the time, and like you have all these questions about like who they are. Liu Beifong read the trigrams. King Buro of Omashu, so another king of Omashu that we learn about. Buro, so Bu, Bumi, there's a name similarity. Neliao the Gardener took her turn. So this female earthbender who has a nickname the Gardener. So she must have a special style of bending that makes things kind of beautiful, like makes gardens really easy or something like that. It's an interesting idea for the character. Abbot Dorje is an airbender character they mention. Zhu Ping-an, of course, is an important character to keep in the back of your head. Tulok, Lord of the Fifth Nation, isn't overly important, but just remember the Fifth Nation because it'll come up later on. They mentioned that part of the agreement here is that he's negotiating a new agreement with the Lord of the Fifth Nation pirates, which is going to contradict some of the Avatar Yang Chen Accords, which are basically some of the agreements that Yang Chen, during her time as the Avatar, made with the pirates about who can and can't come into specific territories of the ocean. So that's pretty interesting. So that's most of what I want to talk about here with chapter 1. I think it's a great start. Like, there's so much detail in terms of just, this is a great introduction to this book of like place names, earthbender characters, ancestors you've heard about before, the mention of the Avatar Relics, but going more in depth. Primarily focusing on Jianzhu and Kelsang as your characters, and they're so much more interesting because they have experience of dealing with a younger, basically kind of growing up in a way, like with a Avatar Kuruk, but now here they are as adults, now having to find the next Avatar. So they're playing a role in the lives of two different Avatars because Kuruk's era was so short, and how desperate they are to find the new Avatar to fulfill the one thing in a way Kuruk asked for before he died. Now Kuruk is mentioned more throughout the book. We'll get into those scenes, and I think going into book 2 as well, we'll get more on Kuruk as well. But I think it's a very, very good first chapter. I like in a way also that Kyoshi is not focused on even that much. It's just like last couple of pages of the first chapter, she comes in, happens to choose one of the Avatar relics. Kelsang sort of notices something in her, but Jianzhu doesn't seem to treat her as being anything overly important. I think that's kind of an interesting one. But yeah, I'll try and probably get the chapter 2 analysis out later on today as well, but that should be interesting, and that is going to be the first one with the 9-year time skip. So that's been my thoughts on chapter 1. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts thoughts were on the first chapter of The Rise of Kyoshi, your thoughts on if I should maybe change up the format for how I do these chapter reviews or anything like that. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.